All right, well, we are going to go ahead and get started. First, just as a round of introduction, my name is Tracy McIntyre. I'm the executive of the Montana Cooperative Development Center, and Nicole Borner, who's one of the cooperative specialists who has been a key element of working with us on our housing work, will be leading most of today's webinar. So Nicole, would you flip the chart for us? So just a couple things. We wanted to kind of give you an overview of what today's agenda. We are going to keep it to an hour. Of course, my team and I are always here if you want to do any follow-up. We will kind of go through who we are, what we do, a very basic overview of cooperatives, and then really get into what we studied with our housing cooperative. Just as allowed, we might get into some information on the investment co-ops that we're also utilizing to address housing. Go ahead, Nicole, if you want to move forward. So first, just so we can keep engaged, I also have Lindsay Gutierrez with our team. She will be reviewing the chat throughout. So if you could just put your name and organization in the chat right now so that we can kind of have some form of introduction and interaction happening. And then we also will, if you have questions that come up, please do put them in the chat. We do have 10 minutes or so at the end where we're going to open it up for Q&A. And then, like I said, we're always open for having some deeper discussion. Nicole? So this is a link to the Cooperative Housing Solution, our senior and workforce housing study that we have completed and published. This is on our website as well if you are able to take the QR code. If not, you can go to www.mcdc.coop and just go right down to the bottom of the page and you'll see our housing study and all of the resources that we have available on that. Go ahead, Nicole. So who is MCDC? We are the statewide economic development branch of the cooperative community. Our role is to empower communities and individuals and businesses to use the cooperative business model to address economic and community needs. We work across the entire state of Montana. We have all 56 counties and the 8 tribal nations. And then we are... sorry, I lost my train of thought because these are not my normal slides, so please forgive me. So there are 6 of us total in the office. We have 4 people out in the field, including myself, Nicole, Lindsay, and Davey Madison, who is also on today. Go ahead, Nicole. And one of our other roles that make us a little unique to the cooperative community and our counterparts is we are the administrators to the Montana Council of Cooperatives. The Montana Council of Cooperatives is a statewide, all sector, all cooperative organization. So what we love is that you can start with us at MCDC in developing co-ops and continue to work forward. And we bring the entire cooperative community into our projects as needed and have this great network of expertise that we can rely on to come in and work with emerging co-ops as needed. Go ahead, Nicole. The cooperative ecosystem is extremely strong in the state of Montana. We have about 170-ish co-ops across the state, and those are in-state co-ops, the ones that have formed within. We also have between 50 and 75, we're still working on that head count, of out-of-state co-ops doing business. We have the cooperative associations of Broadband Montana, Montana Electrical Co-op Association, and Montana Credit Union Network, that our office through the council and MCDC all work together to kind of create this very strong and very vibrant cooperative ecosystem. We're really proud of all of the cooperatives and all of the work that we're doing across the state. Little bit of background. I actually see that Paul with Riverside Crossing is here. The MCDC started exploring housing cooperative solutions back in the early 2000s. I also see that my predecessor, Brian Guion, is on today. So thank you, Brian, for all of the foundation that you gave us when you were in this role of exploring what housing cooperative solutions could be in Montana. Riverside Crossing became the first housing cooperative in Montana and Ravalli County. And we have continued since then and throughout 2019 to get additional feasibility studies done and really explore how we can use the cooperative business model to address housing. In 2023, we developed a partnership with the Affordable Housing Initiative and the Cooperative Development Foundation, which led us to be able to do this very deep dive into cooperative housing and how we can use those in rural communities. Rural, of course, means all of Montana in this scenario. And our work has kind of focused more on senior housing with senior care integration, as well as some workforce housing. In the completed study, we do want to give a shout out to Nicole, of course, for her dedication on it. And then we also had Tom Jacobson with High Country Strategies, who helped us informing this study and did a massive amount of the research for us. And then Nicole, I believe I turn this over to you at this point.
I think so. Thank you, everybody, for being on this webinar. We're pretty excited to present to you guys about this housing study that we put together. I'm going to start with just a real high-level overview of what a cooperative is, just in case there's a few people on here who don't know. So this is the top definition is the official definition by the International Cooperative Association. And then we have a simple term. But one of the ways that I explain to people what a cooperative is when I go out amongst the community or even among my friends and family and they want to know what I'm doing is I explain that a cooperative is a business model where a group of people come together to pool their resources and collectively solve a problem or address an issue in their community. And co-ops are a global form of business. It's important to note that they are state controlled. So every state has different cooperative laws, but that every cooperative adopts the 7 guiding principles. We typically have a slide that shows what those cooperative principles are, but I didn't add them into this one. And then there's just a little bit of information there about how cooperatives worldwide contribute to the world economy. And in Montana, our cooperatives also contribute quite a bit to our own economy. So 7.1 billion in Montana's economy. And we provide all cooperatives provide over 24,000 jobs and create 1.6 billion in family income. So cooperatives are a really strong business model, not only locally, but nationally. And in Montana, we certainly have different types of cooperatives. Most everybody is pretty familiar with agricultural cooperatives or utility cooperatives, our credit unions, and our telecommunications and rural electric cooperatives. We will be specifically talking about Chapter 15 association cooperatives, which is where your producer and consumer co-ops are, and then where the housing cooperatives are formed under. So in Montana, housing cooperatives are incorporated under Section 15 of the MCAs. You can see there's other chapters, but we specifically will be talking about Chapter 15, mostly for the majority of the work that we do. And a cooperative is a business model that is cooperatively owned, it's membership owned, it's membership controlled, and it has specific membership benefits. You guys can read through this. If you ask us to come into your community, we go in deeper into what this means. But for sake of time, I'm just hitting the high level overview here. And cooperatives have specific advantages. So one of the ones that we're going to focus on for housing cooperatives is the access to quality supplies and increase in buying power. That will tie a little bit later on into the presentation, especially when it comes to the senior cooperatives. And it's also important to note that cooperatives survive the first 5 years of operations versus other companies, other business models, and cooperatives are not beholden to the outside investors because it is your members that are the investors of your cooperative. And again, it goes back to that member benefit and member owned. So I'm going to get into the housing cooperative study. If you guys have any questions, please put it in the chat. And if you I I guess not interrupt, but so I can stay with my flow, but we'll answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So a cooperative is a form of home ownership that is collectively owned and controlled by its residents. The residents join the cooperative corporation, and then the corporation owns the land and the building. And unlike traditional for-profit housing models, which prioritize the investor profit, housing cooperatives prioritize the well-being of their members through the democratic decision-making that reflects the collective interest. Cooperative housing has specific benefits, and the cooperative model can be tailored to address each unique financial or community need as well. And housing cooperatives can be formed under different type of models. So for the purpose of this study, I'm gonna focus mostly on the shared equity, and within that shared equity, there are two different models I'm gonna focus on. The limited equity housing cooperative. The primary goal of that is to afford housing options for low, moderate income families and individuals and it places a restriction on the resale. And the outcome of that is to maintain the long-term affordability of housing units and allow the residents to build a little bit of wealth through their limited equity ownership. And then the other shared equity model that I'm going to talk about a little bit is the hybrid model, where the cooperative is structured by partnering with a community land trust or a nonprofit organization. And the outcome of that is it creates the valuable partnerships, and then can also reduce that upfront housing cost and make it more affordable. I'll go into that a little bit more in the presentation, which is the next slide, by the way. So community land trusts can help keep housing prices more affordable and ensure that long-term affordability and prevent the speculative increase of property values. In this particular model, in the hybrid limited equity housing cooperative model, the housing cooperative will partner with a community land trust to free up the cost of the land and keep it a little more affordable in that upfront building, and then as well as resell. So it helps keep that equity in the communities. And this model is becoming it's getting used across the nation a lot to address these housing issues, and especially the rising land costs. But it's important when you are partnering with nonprofits or other organizations to ensure that cooperative autonomy, and the partnerships can provide that significant and necessary benefits. But it's important that the membership of your cooperative understands the financial obligations that they're getting into. So you want to make sure that there's clear financial planning and accountability, and the financial packages should align with the economic capacity of the community that you're working with. So every community, whether it's rural or senior, they're going to have different capabilities of what they can afford as their obligation to belonging to that cooperative. So I'm going to go a little bit into senior housing and healthcare, which was quite a bit of the bulk of this study. I have some data in here. If you go to our website, we have a QR code that shows where all the resources were sourced from. So we all know that Montana's care workforce is shrinking, and that our senior population is rapidly rising. And then there's multiple studies out there where aging in place with the help of home or community-based services is often more cost-effective than nursing homes, and that senior housing offers a specialized living environment that is specific to that demographic of people that they're serving, and that those senior housing ideas can be adopted by any of the various cooperative housing models that we're talking about today. So with this Montana data, you can see that Montana is the 6th highest state for population of 65 plus, and that is expected to grow 25% by 2030. We all know that many of our nursing homes have closed due to staffing shortages. And when that happens and our elderly family and friends don't have a place to stay in their rural communities that they have spent their life in, there is a cascading issues that happen with that we don't want to see happen to our own communities and to our senior people that live in our communities. Montana is also 42nd in home care affordability, and that we have a nursing home turnover rate of 63.2 with the workers. And so one of the solutions is that this study set out to try to find was how can we integrate financial and medical support systems into the cooperative housing model? So the senior home care, senior co-op housing with home care combines the benefits of cooperative ownership and providing those in-home care services. And because one of the advantages of cooperatives is that purchasing power, a cooperative can theoretically bring down the costs. The members decide what services they want to bring in to the as part of their cooperative, and they can determine how much they want to pay through their monthly fees. And those services can include those healthcare services. It can include meals. It can include, housekeeping and activities and transportation, care of the home. That's one of the benefits of the model is that they a lot of times in the senior housing cooperative models, they don't have to maintain the grounds and the property. And when you reach a certain age, you get a little tired of having to do some of all that stuff, or you don't have the ability. And then some other collaborative solutions that this study identified was the programs of all-inclusive care for elderly, which is a PACE program. Montana does not have, to my knowledge, and what we could find, Montana does not have one of those. You have to meet certain markers for that to happen. But this program could be part of that cooperative housing model where they are bringing access to senior care services. There can also be localized agreements, so establishing partnerships or service agreements with local private healthcare providers. The study goes into it goes into all of these solutions and a little bit more in depth. I'm just hitting the highlights of these. And then also as part of our study, we MCDC is exploring a concept for rural financial access and education. Cybersecurity is really important for our elderly seniors, and we're working on resources with our Montana credit unions to provide that access and that education, and that can be done again through the cooperative housing model. And then the other collaborative solution, which ties into the larger work that MCDC is doing, because obviously we champion and we build cooperative business models, is the worker ownership. So the healthcare worker cooperatives can be a part of that integrative care services that can partner with the senior housing cooperative. And I just noticed a handful of spelling errors on this slide. So that's terrible. I hate that. Sorry.
That's where I failed you because I promised I was looking over it.
Yeah.
So apologies, Nicole. I failed you.
Thank you, Tracy.
I'll take the blame.
I hate when you see those too because it kind of interrupts your flow. But anyway, to that worker care, that workforce, healthcare worker cooperatives can complement the senior housing cooperatives. They can, and it will help solve some of the problems, the larger problems that we have in our rural communities as well. So anyway, we think that that's a really good solution to help tie into any of these solutions that we're trying to find to solve senior housing and senior health care. And if you guys, and again, if you go to our website, we have a toolkit that's specific to worker conversion and worker cooperatives as well. So it's a great resource. Senior cooperative housing has certain benefits to it. They're all kind of listed on here, so you guys can look through those if you want to. We have we have a couple, obviously, senior cooperatives in Montana. In rural settings, this model has the potential to address the unique challenges of isolation and limited healthcare access, especially integrating some of those other solutions that we talked about in the earlier slides. And then also community engagement as well. But I think it's important to note that critical conversations should be held during the development of cooperatives and checked throughout the development of the cooperative to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the members that you are hoping to serve and the capacity that can be done in those rural areas as well. And we didn't really go super into depth in this study on workforce housing, but as we all know, it all kind of ties together. So this is, a very holistic solution, and it's a problem that is existing across obviously every community in Montana, but across the nation. So if you don't have that workforce housing that's affordable, we can't build those worker cooperatives to help build those, provide those integrated services to our senior cooperatives as well. This data that I have here on this slide came from op-ed on time to invest in Montana, and then also the Montana Budget and Policy Center has some really good information about Montana's workforce housing. And I won't go with this into depth too much, but we do have a couple pilot projects that we're working on that will kind of tie that senior housing and the workforce housing, and hopefully those can flesh out to provide some of these cooperative solutions to our communities in Montana. And obviously, as we all know, there are significant barriers to housing in Montana, whether it's traditional housing or cooperative housing. So our property taxes have increased. The cost of construction in rural areas is significantly higher quite often. And access to financing can be a barrier as well. And then I've listed, and again, the study goes into this a little bit deeper, but there's obviously these other barriers. There's regulatory issues, social perceptions, but a lot of people don't, they don't really understand cooperative housing models, and there's some social perceptions around that. And then there's operational costs. So those obviously have to be taken in consideration. And then there's legal considerations as well that need to be taken into consideration with those barriers. So this slide, I've just listed a handful of housing cooperatives. Most of them are in Montana, but there is the 74 York Cooperative. We have a small case study on that in the housing study that's, I think it's worth people reading and looking into. They discovered in their model, they have a limited equity housing cooperative. And as their seniors were aging, they realized that they needed some of that long-term integrative care. So what they did is they built on the campus, they built a longer-term care cooperative to keep the couples together, even though that longer-term care is not part of the cooperative model. They recognized the need and they wanted to be able to serve their members. So it's a pretty interesting case study, and I encourage everybody to kind of go look into it and read up on it. And then, at MCDC, we recognize that the cooperative model is not the answer to everything, and it takes all of these different models that are out there and all the different organizations and groups that are working together to try to solve this really hard problem of housing in Montana and senior care as well. So I just hit just lightly on some of the alternative models that are available. The study again goes into these a little bit deeper, and we recognize at MCDC that these are really important partners that we work with together to try to solve these issues across the state of Montana. So I'm going to touch a little bit, because this is one of the things that I work on quite a bit for MCDC, is the real estate investment models. It's a little bit different than the housing model. I have a slide after this that that shows the difference between them. But real estate investments are an investment tool that allows business owners and residents and organizations to collectively pool their resources together and purchase either commercial or residential property, and you can rehab those. Quite often, real estate investment cooperatives remain the landlords, and they create investment and income into the investment cooperative through the landlord renting out those buildings. And this purpose is really important because we see in our rural communities where land speculators are coming in and buying up, whether it's residential or commercial. And community members want their properties to hopefully remain community owned, because then you can kind of control the costs a little bit, because you're serving that community need. There are some really good examples out there as well. I did not put that in a slide here. But if you guys go out there and search other real estate investment cooperatives across the nation, it's important to note that, and keep in mind that every state has different cooperative laws as you go out and look at those examples. But we have set up a couple in Montana. And then one of the other things too is another name that they're called by is opportunity development cooperatives. The real estate investment cooperatives are the ones that actually pool their money together to purchase real estate. Another form of that opportunity development cooperative is like a revolving loan fund. So community members will pool their resources together, and then they will loan money out to projects that benefit their community. And then it's just like any other revolving loan fund. And we've set up one of those in the state of Montana as well. And there is a toolkit on our website with the resources on the opportunity development co-ops as well. And then this slide is the one that kind of shows the difference between a housing cooperative and the real estate investment cooperatives. And it's mostly around the purpose, and then the membership structure as well. But if you guys are interested in learning about either the housing cooperatives or the real estate investment cooperatives, we are more than happy to come into your community and do a deeper dive into either or. Some of the housing presentations that we've been doing with MCDC have kind of touched on both, as communities are trying to figure out which one of those models works best for their solutions and their needs in their community. So I guess we're at the point where we got questions now. So I want to thank everybody really quick. Again, you can visit our tool, you can visit our website, see all of our other resources that are on there. And I want to give a thank you to our funders, the Cooperative Development Fund and USDA Rural Development. And our team at MCDC is always happy to have further conversations in your guys' communities. And then please fill out our presentation evaluation, because you guys know if you have to do this, it's nice to have that data. So thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions now.
Nicole, before we get into questions, I do want to just echo our thanks to our funders. Mary Griffin is here today with Cooperative Development, the foundation, which was a critical part in us being able to do these deeper dive studies. Excuse me. We also utilize Montana Healthcare Foundation, and we want to thank them for their support in all of the work that we're doing in both our housing and our food sovereignty work across the state and other areas. And then, of course, I believe we have a number of rural development members that we are always very thankful for. So just echoing that, thank you. I think we have some questions. Brian, of course, is throwing out some really hard ones right out of the gate. I don't know, Brian, your question was, what is the smallest housing co-op that was done in rural areas? Understanding that demographic plays a part to it. I think the smallest we found in our research was around 16. We have those homestead cooperatives that are mostly in the Midwest. I don't want to put Mary on the spot, or Nicole, did you find any of the other really small ones that you could point out?
I didn't. I know that they're hard to come by because of scale. And
Yeah.
There are not very many of them out there.
And Mary, not putting you on the spot, but knowing that you've done a lot of work across the nation, do you know of any super small housing cooperatives?
Well,
In
if you add the rock model, there may be fairly small rock models
Yeah.
that might even be under that 16. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what their smallest is.
Yeah.
No, I don't know exactly, but there will be a map that'll come out soon from UHAB National, where people can track where limited equity housing co-ops are. On the senior side, I don't know specifically, but great work, by the way.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was
And
late.
then
Hey, Tracy, can I chime in on that? It's Kaya at NeighborWorks.
yeah, I was
Yeah.
just gonna ask because I saw Brittany's comment because I know you guys had yours was like 7 or 8
Yep,
members
so we've
on
done
your
8.
LinkedIn.
And we, when we were working on some housing cooperative research, we interviewed the Lopez Community Land Trust on Lopez Island, and they
Yeah.
do a scattered site and very small co-op. I think like 4 units is maybe the smallest that they do. So I think it has been helpful to, and I know Champlain Housing Trust has done
Yeah.
some smaller co-ops too. I don't think they're doing it now because of some of the challenges, but yeah, in these rural areas, people are still getting creative. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and
Yeah, thank you, Kaya.
you were specifically asking about rural, right? Because on the urban side, it's different. You could have 4-unit,
Yeah.
building and stuff.
Yeah, the question was, what is the smallest housing co-op that was done in a rural area? And for those that don't know, ROCs are residentially owned communities. Those are ran through, and we have an excellent partner with NeighborWorks Montana that runs the ROC program in the state. And we do highlight those in the study. We don't go into detail. We actually recommend that you contact Kaya and her team on those because that's not one that we focused on. Are there other questions or?
No, but it's not rural, but I did find some really interesting co-op housing that was happening in Oregon in kind of somewhat smaller towns, and they were doing kind of tiny housing co-ops, and there was a handful of pretty cool models there as well, but they are very tiny homes, and I still would consider them urban compared to what we consider rural in Montana. And they were partnering a lot with community land trusts as well. They had a handful of different models.
Overview of the study that we did. We're happy to dive into some deeper questions. We do have some time. If there is anything that anybody wants to ask, we did provide throughout the links the work that we're doing. As Nicole mentioned, we do have 3 pilot programs that came out of it, as well as a number of other housing cooperative projects that Nicole and Davey are already leading in rural communities. We'll continue to update resources. We're continuing to work with CDF. Our goal is to actually create a housing toolkit similar to the ones that we shared around our investment work and our worker conversion. And so we're always happy to have those discussions. There's so many people, and I know some of you guys like normally ask a lot of questions. Quiet though. And you can feel free to get offline and just ask a question if you would like, if you're not comfortable putting it in chat.
Can I talk out loud?
Yes, of course, Brian.
Excuse me, I got the bad cold, but the reason I asked on the smaller units and in Montana and everywhere, the bigger units aren't gonna work, but kind of didn't really think about the tiny home thing, Nicole, because I'm thinking really most of our seniors, and in some cases it doesn't have to be seniors, they're looking for a place to live that's comfortable. But if we can somehow get maybe some tiny homes with a common, some commons, we could fill some of those needs, because we're seeing the same thing. We got nursing homes closing over here. People not having, they just need someone to look after them. maybe a couple hours during the week, whatever, but I think instead of building a big complex, maybe these smaller homes would work. But the coolest thing I saw, I believe, is down when you go in just north of Deadwood, South Dakota. It looks to me like they had a community that was set up right, that you could come in there, senior housing, and as soon as you needed some assistance, you either stayed in that same apartment or you scooted over, you were in the same area, and you went all the way over to the long-term care and the nursing home. You never left the site, so your people were all familiar. So that's kind of a bigger complex, but it was pretty cool looking how that would work. And you're not leaving the community in that, but we're just struggling over here just for the small towns to open up some houses, but also keep our seniors in the community and keeping some amenities in there. So I'm just going to throw that out there. That's why I asked. It's just be nice to find a contractor who could float some of this stuff for a little while. I think that would help these projects to sell some of those units, but just my thoughts anyway.
Yeah, that's great, Brian. It is difficult in our rural communities, especially when nursing homes are closing, and they're at the point where they need some of those services, and they can't stay in the community. And I was visiting with a couple ladies yesterday about some of those older homes that are generationally owned in communities. And even if the seniors aren't living there, that housing stock is still not opened up to the public to purchase. So how do you address all of those issues regarding housing in rural Montana? I think that's one reason why MCDC recognizes that the cooperative model is not the only model, and it requires all of us that are working in the area of housing. How do we all partner and try to figure these solutions out? It's crisis mode now.
I'll just make one more comment on the housing thing. There is a house in North Dakota. It was a 4-bedroom house that they actually turned that into for 4 seniors, and they had their own bedrooms, and then they had they had their own bathrooms, but they all shared the kitchen in that too, so they could look after each other. So I would just throw that out. That was a little bit different, that the house was big enough and there wasn't a lot of big investment into it.
We actually have a couple senior assisted living in Roundup that are set up that way, where they bought some of the bigger homes in town, and they have, I don't know, they might have 6 seniors in there. They all have their own bedroom, but and it's assisted living, right? So it's not the nursing home, it's a private assisted living, but it's basically that same concept you were talking about.
And this will address, Victoria left a question. Do you know of any older adult housing cooperatives that have partnered with home care cooperatives for services? Nicole, do you have that off the top of your head?
Could you repeat that question?
Do you know of any older adult housing cooperatives that have partnered with the home care cooperatives for services?
I do, but not off the top of my head. I think there is some reference to it in the housing study. I'm almost positive there is.
One of the ones that we did spend a lot of time on and had a number of discussion on was the York example. That was a co-op that actually the co-op engaged another developer to create the senior housing or the senior care facility. So it's not necessarily part of the co-op itself, but in partnership with and next to, so that their members can move over. That's a really cool example. Well, Nicole's looking at that. And Mary, do you know any of them off the top of your head of the ones that have integrated? Because that's kind of what we were looking at, and there weren't a ton.
Right. I don't think
US.
yeah, I think that there's huge potential there, but one of the things is a lot of the housing, the home care worker co-ops are not necessarily near a lot of the housing co-ops, but there is one in New York, and it would be great to see, that has 1,700 home care workers. And I think she's trying to do more connections to all the co-ops in New York City, which is sort of a perfect connection. We'd love to see more of that. We've talked about that with the home care initiative, but haven't done it. Again, it's all about making those connections with people across sectors, across places. But yeah, it'd be a great connection. We're actually hearing a lot of demand from seniors, particularly seniors without families, who want more connections because they're getting very worried as they age, and they don't want to go into traditional older adult facilities, and they're getting worried as they age they will not have that support. And they do want to think more about cooperatively, not necessarily cooperatives per se, but either the co-housing or the other type models, but some are looking at cooperatives.
Yeah. And I would say,
go
sorry,
ahead, Tracy.
Nicole. I was just going to say one of our pilot programs actually is on that, is how do we take a senior facility and integrate senior care, whether it's a home care co-op, or how do we get that integration. So that is actually one of the pilot programs that we're working on this year to hopefully answer and put together a program that others not only can we use in Montana, but that we can share with across the bigger nation conversations that we're having with Mary and her team.
There's just two things I wanted to bring up. One was Brian talked about, like a bigger older home with 4 or 5 bedrooms in the shared. We do touch briefly on converting, other existing properties rather than building from the ground up a little bit, just briefly in the study. But the second thing is sometimes you would find really good co-housing models that were nonprofit, that are not cooperative, but have really great value and really great ideas. And one of them, again, was out of Oregon, and I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but what they did is they have these communities, these co-housing communities, where they integrate children that have been in the foster system, and then elderly people that do not have family members like Mary was talking about, and they all live in this co-housing place together. They're referred to, it's the kids have to be together, and it has to be a family that is fostering or adopted these kids. And then they all live together in this multi-generational co-housing community, but it's a nonprofit model. But it was one of my favorite models that I found that I just thought had so much value to it. Anyway, I think there is a link to that that model in the resource, so if people want to look at that a little bit more too.
And on the conversion side, we've got the North Missoula group and NeighborWorks. They did that conversion on the Wolf Avenue one that I did share earlier, and we do mention that. So that's a good one to look at for your conversions and what they did on that one. Okay, I'm seeing no more comments or questions in the chat. Okay. So as we wrap up, and we'll give you back like 10 minutes of your day, which we all can always enjoy, or at least I can always enjoy. Please do or don't hesitate to reach out to one of us. Lindsay will be sharing the recording as well as the resources. She's already asked if you guys could give us, this is our first one of releasing our housing information. We're going to be definitely out talking to different communities about the potential. And then, as Nicole said, we do think outside the box. There's ways that community members could potentially get engaged through investment or other ways like that. And so we are exploring, hopefully over the course of this year, with our toolkit coming out and pilot programs happening, that we can continue to kind of share information. Feel free to holler at us if you have any questions that come up as you go out about your day. Nicole, do you want to say anything else?
No, just thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to the presentation and participate. We're pretty passionate about trying to find cooperative solutions across our state. So we appreciate anybody that wants to listen to us get on our soapbox and talk about it.
All right, with that, everyone have a really great afternoon, and we hope stay safe and warm. And it looks like weather's finally changing in Montana. It was 38 in a place I drove through quickly this morning. So take care, everyone, and we'll see you down the road.